preface this meeting by saying sorry about the facial appearance. Chemotherapy on the next level, so I have severe burning to the face at the moment for melanomas. Warning to you all, make sure you use lots of sunscreen when you're out in the open. Melanomas are a pain in the bum. So tonight we've got two topics going on. We'll get through both of them, I'm pretty sure. So I'm going to share a screen with you, and I'm going to talk about this issue of how do you deal with communicating risk to clients. And I'm sure you've all had that issue, and you will continue to have the issue, as will I. And the reason why, apart from anything else, we see that in how we're handling COVID as a community and as a society. There's a broad range from people that are writing saying, hey, we don't want to have wear masks or be locked down in any way. And on the other hand, we've got people that are hiding away, not coming out at all and having everything home delivered. So it's the same when it comes to trees. There's going to be different perceptions of risk. But one of the things that I've found useful in terms of communicating is to try and communicate, first of all, contrasting things. And I know we looked at that, I'm pretty sure, last block round. Is that right, Peter?
Sorry, I wasn't listening.
Yeah, I knew it'd catch you out. I'm pretty sure we've looked at comparing risks of things, but I'll quickly go over it now. So just this.
Yeah, go over it again because I don't really recall that very well.
Yeah, that one might not have, Peter. I've got one of those silly minds that every conversation I have merges into one. I'm just going to make my screen a little bit bigger to make it easier for you guys to read. Can you all read that?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. I'll make it a tad bigger if you want.
Yeah.
No, too big. Okay, there we are. That'll give you the best I can do there. But here's looking at some of the things that are likely to kill us in Australia. And the year for the data. So sometimes these numbers will vary. And I apologise, I haven't got 10-year moving averages or anything like that. It really is not that critical. Melanomas, a 1 in 13,500. Driving in 2017 was 1 in 20,000. By the way, last year was a little lower because we drove less. Asthma, 1 in 60,000 chance of dying from it. So these are things that are a real risk. 1 in 100,000. Has anyone here ever thought about, boy, I don't want to go to sleep because I could get killed tonight? Is that? I get that thought occasionally, but that's because I just upset the wrong people. Falling from a bed, we don't think of a bed as a dangerous thing, but falling from or on a bed is about 1 in 420,000. Death by animals, sharks, spiders. Of course, the deadly ones in Australia are horses, cattle, and dogs, not crocodiles, snakes, and sharks. There's 1 in 830,000. Fall involving a chair, and that's from leaning back on them or standing on them. That's about 1 in a million. And death from trees, about 1 in 5 million. And accidental tree or tree part failures whilst you're inside a building is 1 in about 189 million. Round up 1 in 200 million. It's in that range. At 1 in 189,000, by the way, is what I call the irony of 450, and that is you're 450 times more likely to be killed by your bed than you are by a tree going into your house whilst you're lying there at night worrying about the tree going through your house. Perhaps you should think about getting rid of the bed. And of course, we'd never do that, but people don't understand where the risk from trees falls. And it is true, and I've been picked on many times for this, it is true that there are some people that are going to be at higher risk and some people that are going to be at lower risk. So, for example, a person with no tree over their property is really unlikely to be killed by a tree, whereas a person who's living in the Dandenongs, they have an increased likelihood. Theirs might be, 10 or 100 times higher than that. And so one of the things I've said is, how do you prepare a client for this? And one of the things that from my side, let me move this to this side. That'll give me a better thing. So I'll try and give them some educational material and a typical report on risk. But is to set down some limits and, make it clear. To acknowledge that a small number of significant defects are not apparent. And as such, there is still a possibility that these could fail and if a person is beneath, such failure could cause serious harm. The worst of these problems relates to trees that have had roots recently cut or otherwise damaged. And I say that, you know, in terms of the school, there's no evidence of that being the case, but it might be elsewhere. And then here's the critical bit. The purpose of an inspection was to identify, the next paragraph. The purpose of a true risk assessment is not to eliminate risk. A risk assessment is about doing what's reasonably practicable to identify trees that pose a significantly elevated risk of harm and determining what actions can be reasonably and practically undertaken to mitigate that risk. The risk assessor then needs to communicate that information in a manner that can be used by the risk manager and other stakeholders. Trees that are retained and properly managed have some level of residual risk. This will by necessity mean that over time there'll be numerous near misses, periodic property damage, particularly in association with storm events, and on rare occasions someone may be harmed. Now, just by telling them that, what happens when they call you up and they say, look, you know, trees just dropped a branch? The answer is, that's great. That's what we expected, you know? And then to go on to the last paragraph, trees are living organisms that by virtue of their size always pose some level of risk. It is inappropriate for risk mitigation measures to be focused on eliminating or reducing risk that is already within the range that is broadly acceptable. To do so would require disproportionate effort and expenditure and a disregard for the many benefits provided by trees, including numerous health benefits. So that's communicated to the client. In fact, that section there is communicated to a bigger client, so a school or a caravan park or something like that, before we even go and look at their trees. We want them to understand that that's what we're doing. We're not there to remove everything. Someone's in the background's got their mic on. Pete, can you just mute the mics of parties?
Yeah, I will try to do that.
Yeah, you should be able to.
Don't want to mute everybody, that's all.
Oh, you don't want to mute me? No, that's not good.
Right.
So again, it's how we communicate that process. Now, of course, we've muted everybody, Peter, and I want to ask a question of them. So maybe you can answer that. And if you want to talk, guys, just let us know. How do you communicate this to clients? Do you not communicate it? And if you don't communicate it, are you leaving yourself exposed to that situation where they're going to come back at you and have this niggly thing because it dropped a branch and it was, you know, had the kid been there 33 days and 4 hours beforehand, he would have been dead. You know, how do you deal with it, Peter?
Well, it's by talking about the risk in terms that you've just described. So that trees will fail and that there is some risk from trees, but you can't reasonably eliminate all risk, and that some risk needs to be accepted. And then I normally talk about those comparative risks that you mentioned earlier on.
And how are you finding that when you're dealing with clients?
Usually I can get them to accept that. And I think that, you know, it's sort of semi-amusing that your bed, where you're lying in bed and worrying about the tree falling on your house, is actually the bed's more dangerous than the tree. So
yeah, even with trees being there, Peter, probably 4 times or more dangerous than the trees.
I'm also aware of a comparison that's been made for driving in your car. So I understand that the risk from tree death is similar to around about a 300-kilometre drive. So you get in your car and you drive there and back 150 k's, and you've just accepted a similar risk to getting killed by a tree.
Yeah, and that's probably a fairly a good analysis of the situation. Again, that'll vary depending on where you are and slight changes. But yes, it's we don't at all get worried about getting into a car, and we certainly, even though we know it's lowers the risk, we don't wear full face helmets, and we don't have 5-point harnesses put in our car. We can do both those lawfully.
If I still get some doubt from the client, I start talking about the benefits from trees, and that's that's a pretty easy subject to go on about because there's lots of benefits from trees.
That's right. Even and I know I've speculated on this in that paper that we've got on Arborist's website, but even to the point that letting people see trees fail and see tree parts fail alerts them to that fact that, you know, trees do fail, particularly during inclement weather, and that they need to be cautious about that. And, you know, when you live in a fully sterilized environment, like, you know, all the paths are dead level, we can fall over. And Peter, both you and I have spent a fair bit of time in Asia, and I'm always amazed how the Asians can walk around and not trip over completely uneven surfaces, and an Australian can slip over or trip over something that is just 5 millimeters high. So I think there's, again, knowing that the surfaces are uneven means that you take more attention to it, and knowing that trees can drop branches, I think, is an important component.
I'm not sure that's correct, Mark. I think the difference is more that if an Australian trips over a crack in the footpath, they sue, whereas people don't do that overseas.
Yeah, but then I think it is that too that we don't take the attention. We expect somebody else to always take that responsibility for us. And
yes.
Now, one of the things that I've found useful, and it may be useful for others in the group, is when I'm talking to a client and risk comes up, and it often does, it'd probably be 20 to 30% of the conversations I have are about risk. One of the things I like to talk about when I'm looking at risk is saying that I'd sleep in the room that was directly below the tree. The risk associated with the tree is small, then that would be the approach that I'd have. So I'd say, look, you know, I'd be comfortable sleeping in that. And there are some trees that I'd be comfortable sleeping in a tent in the middle of a thunderstorm under, things like the average brush box, the average grey box. So Eucalyptus mollicana, Lophostomus concertus, they're trees that I'd be happy camping under in a storm. Other trees that I'd be less comfortable with, like a Camaldulensis, for example. I think if you're parking underneath a Camaldulensis and camping, you're taking some elevated risk with that. And that risk is still small, but it just helps communicate. So again, being able to say, I would sleep in that room, I've found it's very reassuring for a person to hear. So any questions on that section, guys?
I'm just saying, if I could say something on that and communicating risk, working with council now, I deal with a lot of public, and I find different people have different opinions as well and different risks, and trying to explain a situation and the risk, you have to take each personality different, and you have to address each situation different, because some people are, the tree's going to jump out and sort of come into my house and kill me, or others are, I'm happy for the tree and I just want a little bit of pruning just to make it a bit safe. And I feel having education and trying to explain that to people and showing that you actually have some knowledge and some background to know what you're talking about, and being able to explain that clearly often puts people's mind at ease, and they're happy to know that you're educated and you've told them something and you've explained to them correctly.
Yeah, look, and I think private contractors probably have an unfair advantage in that, Luke, in that you're working for the dubious local government, whereas when I'm going in there, they're paying for my expertise. I still get the occasional person that's not happy with it. Most are, but I think, Luke, were you present one day when a lady accosted us in the street with a big grandis?
Yeah, I was there that day.
Yeah, pretty entertaining day.
Well, enjoyed it.
You know, what happens if this tree drops a branch and kills my child? Now, this tree wasn't even over a property at all. That's how paranoid she was about it. And I said, look, if it drops a branch and kills your kid, they'll be dead. It's the obvious thing that happens when your kid's killed. And she was just so concerned about this tree. And I said to her, look, you'll put your kids in the car and drive them around. Should I be calling docs and reporting them? And that's a risk that's just so much higher. And the answer is no. Of course, you'd never call docs in that situation, but it just shows you how people think and process risk. And as I said, COVID has been a perfect example where we get the irresponsibility of the riots last weekend, and then we get the complete paranoia where we lock down and hide away from everyone for 5 years. And there'll be people that, and I certainly know at least one, who really hasn't had much contact with society since COVID came out. So I don't think that's what we need. Any other comments, guys, before we go on to the next topic? No? The next one's disclaimers. And this disclaimer here, I wish I could say it's not real, but it is. It's been altered to conceal the guilty. But that's seven lines, one sentence, and I'm still not 100% sure. I spent about 4 or 5 hours trying to work this out. Peter, I believe we had somebody who managed to get it to somewhat coherent sentences.
Yes, we did. So
Who was that?
I think I sent you that person.
I didn't open it up. Sorry, Peter.
Yeah. So if you,
I can do that now.
yes, I think.
So who we got? From Shane Hall.
Yeah.
Shane, are you online? What a shame. Fictitious tribunal gives no warranty to the reliability or accuracy of any information, nor accepts any responsibility arising in any way, including by reason of negligence, for the errors and omissions herein, nor accepts any liability. I think Shane's almost having a laugh at us. For any loss, damage suffered by a person or any other persons placing any reliance on acting on the basis of the contents hereof, no party shall be entitled to raise any claim or suit of action on the basis of the content of this report. So yes, I think Shane has been having a bit of a tongue in cheek here, and that's indeed, that's the way that often disclaimers read, is like, no, I've given you this report and I've given you all this information, but I'm not responsible for anything that I write. And that's not what we want to communicate. So the question is, should you have a disclaimer or not? I'm not diametrically opposed to having a disclaimer. I just think that it can be handled in better ways. And one of those better ways is to clearly express what the report's about and the limits of that report, so that you're not having any confusion. If your job was to go out and perform a ground-based visual tree assessment stage 1 and assess the risk of one tree in the front yard, then there's no problems if a tree in the backyard fails. The dilemma becomes, for many arborists, well, what happens if the tree in the backyard fails and I haven't told them that, I should have inspected it, I was there, blah, blah. The answer is, it doesn't make any difference. The scope of what you're asked to do is really what determines what you do. And, if you see a big tree that's rocking on the neighbouring property and you don't knock on the door of the neighbours, this is Australia, you'd be pretty hard pressed to find yourself in trouble over that. So, Peter, you've been running disclaimers until recently, and you've just decided to remove them.
Yes, because of our discussions, and because one of the main reasons is that arborists are very rarely sued for giving advice that isn't fit for purpose. And as you say, you're only required to do what's industry best standard and to the best of your ability. So if you produce work in good faith and something goes wrong, I do have insurance, professional indemnity insurance, and I just think that that putting a disclaimer in there doesn't actually add to the report. It doesn't inform the client in any way, and if there's very little danger, then how is it protecting me? Protecting me from what?
Yeah, it doesn't really protect you. Many years ago, in a different life, I managed Australia's first skate park, and all those issues of you claim or take all responsibility, we accept nothing, was made very clear to me in the first meeting with my solicitor over the subject, where he turned around and said, yeah, you can put any sign like that up you like, but the moment you do something that's negligent, that a reasonable person wouldn't do, it doesn't matter what that sign says, you can be sued. So, as you're saying, the issue is the disclaimer really doesn't give you a lot of protection other than what you would be lawfully entitled to. So if you're lawfully entitled to it, why go through that process of expressing it? And I think in some ways, Shane's comment here, sorry, and I will make it a little larger for those that, no, yep. Yeah, is that...
Mark, we're still looking at your tree risk assessment.
Okay. Well, let me see if I can fix that up, Peter. Hang on a second. Yep, okay. Great. Thanks. So can you see the email now?
Yeah. Yes,
yeah, great. So, I mean, things like gives no warranty or as to the reliability, the accuracy of the information. I mean, it's not really what that that disclaimer says. The dilemma with that disclaimer, and the reason I use it is that disclaimer is unintelligible. I really can't figure it out. It's so complex and convoluted. And what's amazing is, a while ago, I had to do a site where this report came up, and that was the disclaimer on it. And I said, look, I don't know about anything else, but it's certainly get your disclaimer looked at and tidied up so that it makes some sense, because I can't understand it. And I spent about 4 or 5 hours and finally did manage to write it so that it made some sense. But this is this issue of things not changing. I wrote that email to them and said, look, you might want to think about fixing things up. It was in 2004, and the last time I saw the same disclaimer was in 2020. So 16 years later, the same thing is happening. And I guess if there's one thing that I can say to anyone that's writing reports is, if you think you're doing great reports now, fantastic. In 10 years' time, I promise you'll look back and wonder what the hell you were doing. If your reports aren't improving every year, then my next piece of advice would be get out of the industry. Nobody I know writes brilliantly to start off with. It really does take work. And I think I've mentioned before, Jordan Peterson has a wonderful series on how to write a paper. And he would say, write the paper, write the whole thing, then go through and have a look at each paragraph in detail. Take each sentence, disassemble it, reassemble it, change the order, think about it, craft it again, go right through, recraft each paragraph. And when you've done that, put it to one side and start again and rewrite. And there's a point to which what he's saying is correct, is that all these things take time to do. What I will say is, if you are using a disclaimer, my suggestion is it's worthwhile having a discussion with a legal expert if you think that it's going to provide you any protection. If anyone here, anyone concerned about what they might need to protect in terms of a disclaimer?
Just thinking, Mark, it's not quite a disclaimer, but is explaining to your audience or the person who's commissioned the report that trees are living organisms and subject to change through weather and wind events. That's not trying to say that anything you say will be used as evidence sort of thing, but it's more of explaining to your client that they are living organisms, that a wind event could change things straight away.
Sure. And I could do that in a whole additional way. So I'll share that with you. Let me share now. So you should see, sorry, share. Okay. So I get that and I tell that. So here's a school one again. School one's where I do most of my risk stuff. Ignoring that. Okay, so here we are. After weather events that cause trees to fail on school grounds or nearby properties, trees should be inspected by a responsible adult for signs of broken limbs that are caught up in the trees and fresh splits and cracks in the stem or larger branches and evidence of any tree moving in the ground, such as heaving of soil or radial cracking. And so it really is a situation where we acknowledge that that could happen, but how am I going to deal with that unless I'm there the day after it's happened or sometime after it's happened? I can't predict that's going to happen. And so,
I'm not very sure about the responsible adult part of that, Mark. We had a fig tree fail in the Mullumbimby Showgrounds here a few years ago, and it was only a 9-year-old kid that noticed this crack in the middle of it opening and closing. Dozens, hundreds of adults that were all standing around there, they didn't notice it.
Yeah, well, maybe I should put a responsible observant adult. But I had an experience a number of years ago where Robert Stavro was in the middle of a school ground looking up at dead branches or for dead branches in the tree, and a young 8-year-old kid came up to him and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm looking for dead branches." And the kid laughed and said, "Mister, don't you know all trees have big dead branches?" And I thought it was interesting again that out of the mouth of an 8-year-old, you get the reality check. So yes, I think there's a point in acknowledging that that's the case, Luke. I just don't know that I need to express that in a disclaimer stage. So trees are going to be subject to
yeah, I totally agree. Like, well, you don't quite need a disclaimer, but I still feel, yeah, there's some point for us that there is room in a report where we have to explain that they do change, and I feel they're vital in reports sometimes, depending the situation. But
absolutely. So it's how we express that. We express that, trees can be damaged during wind and storm events. So it's important that after a wind or storm event, you look at the tree and see whether there's any indication of any damage or harm. Yeah. And there's a really great flyer, and I'll go right down to the end. And this is produced by David Evans of Valid, and it's available online to download. But it is really great. So, evidence of movement in the ground, broken and caught up branches. And it's fascinating. There's a person sitting under this one here. Then splits and cracks. And this one here is in a school playground. That's one that I took. It's in an out of bounds area right beside it. And I just said, look, for fouls, it's not going to go on the playground. Again, you can leave it or you can remove it. And then big dead branches, and then where you've got lots of fruiting bodies of fungi. And, I think they're the really obvious things that we can pick up. The minor subtle things that... Sorry, Luke?
I was saying, I don't think the two should be mixed up. Like I think there's still room in a report for explaining that they can change, but a disclaimer is something different to explaining that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. They are two different things. It's how you do it. It's the words you choose. If you say, look, we're not responsible for anything that happens, you've lost a wonderful communication point to say, look, trees will drop things. Don't worry about it. That's normal. After a storm, go outside. If you see something like, these obvious, the 1, 2, 3s, then by all means, that's the time to get some work done. And it's not the end of the world by any stretch of the imagination. So it's not a matter of expressing it by saying, look, I'm not responsible, these things can happen. It's a matter of saying, look, these things will happen. That's just a normal part of having a tree. You have a tree, you have severe winds, you have a thunderstorm, you have the right conditions, the right loading from the right direction, and things will fail. And that's a part of having a tree. I'm sure that there's not too many dogs out there that I went and picked them up by the side of them and jiggled them up and down and hurt them. I wouldn't end up getting a nip. I don't have to be told, don't go pick up dogs by the middle of their backs and scruff them around and throw them around until they bite you. There's a point to which there's also some assumed knowledge. And I think most people have some idea that trees fail, but I think this little shot here off the right-hand side is, where there's a broken branch and someone's sitting underneath it, just displays that sometimes, as you say, Luke, we're oblivious to what's happening around us. We don't look. And that's, I think, in part comes from a society that says, well, don't worry, we'll take care of everything. We'll give you no risk. And I think that's a part of the risk that we have in trying to overly sterilize trees. I think people need to see that they do fail, they do drop things, they do cause damage, and we are protected. And I think, I'm not sure it was Peter or Luke that said one of the things that they're aware of is that it was Peter, that very few people get sued, and that's true. Even if you don't pick up something that you should have done, I think that happens fairly regularly. It's not the end of the world. First of all, it's not late to cause harm. And secondly, as long as you've gone through a systematic process, where do you put the limits? Do you spend 30 minutes carefully examining every branch and every limb on a tree that you're inspecting, or is a 2 to 5 minute, quick look over and seeing nothing of concern sufficient? I think you'd be hard pressed to find yourself in a situation where the litigation would proceed because you didn't spend 30 minutes on the site looking at every branch in the finest of detail with a pair of binoculars.
And the other thing is that just because you can't see an obvious risk feature doesn't mean that there's not something in the tree and the tree can still fail. So I think there's a number of examples where trees that didn't have a obvious risk feature have failed and have caused injury, death, and damage.
Yeah, so, and that's exactly right, Peter.
You can look at photos if you like, and you still won't necessarily find every problem.
I think I might have mentioned last class, and I'll finish off with this story and then say goodbye to you all. But I had a school that I was looking at, and again, I think Luke's class might have been with me when we went out. And I just inspected it a couple of days beforehand, and they called me and said, "Look, a tree's fallen over." And it was a Nikolai. I got there. There was nothing to indicate that the tree was likely to fall over. It had a slight lean, but it's a Nikolai. It's not uncommon to see some lean in them. And the principal said, "Look, what would happen if a kid had been there? They could have been killed." And I said, "No, a child had been there. They would have seen the tree rocking. It wasn't just going to go bang and snap. They'd have seen some evidence of the failure beforehand." Well, that was great. The following year, I went out and did another inspection, and about 2 weeks later, a tree fell through the neighbouring property, and the principal grabbed me aside and said, "Mark, you've got to do something about this." And I said, "Yep, I get the deal. What we're going to do is we're going to cut off everything that looks similar and cut down everything that looks similar. We're going to get rid of every tree right throughout the country, and we're going to go kids, and we're going to wrap them up with cling wrap. When we realise we're stupid, we'll stop asking for stupid things." And they had a laugh, and I had a laugh, and realised that that was a crazy thing to try and get rid of those issues. In reality, what had happened? It's a school that's had 3 failures in the 7 years that I've been looking after the trees, and all of them have done no harm to anybody, some property damage, but that's what insurance is for. You can't say, if I can't specifically describe what is of concern, then the reality is I don't need to do anything. If I can't say this is what is wrong, then I've done my job. And that's all we can do. Guys, I'm going to say good night to you all, and we'll have this up and ready for you as a video for you to go back over and have a look, get some ideas from. If there's anything from tonight that you want to have in print, please let Peter know, and we'll send you off the next invite in the next week. So thanks for me, thanks for Pete, goodbye all.
Thanks, Mark.